Little girl's letter asked for a home. Next night, the widowed vampire king knocked on their door. It was the week before Christmas in the quiet, snow-drowned outskirts of Briarwood, at the edge of a dark, ancient forest. The town's center glowed in the distance. Strings of lights wound through bare trees, shop windows dressed in red bows and holly, the air thick with wood smoke and the promise of celebration. But at the weathered cabin pressed against the tree line, Christmas felt like a story told to other children. 6-year-old Ellie sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor near the struggling fireplace, tongue pressed between her lips, gripping a red crayon. Her wild curls caught the orange glow of dying embers as she carefully wrote, each letter uneven and oversized. "To whoever hears little kids the best," she began. She had heard her mother talk about Santa once, years ago, but Santa didn't come to houses without heat or food. Santa was for kids whose mothers didn't cry quietly at the kitchen table after tucking them in. So Ellie aimed her letter elsewhere, toward something bigger, older, something that lived in the spaces between wishes and shadows. Her mother, Clara, moved slowly around the single-room cabin. Her blonde hair hung loose and tangled, framing a face still young but worn thin by too many long nights. The sleeves of her patched wool sweater were frayed at the cuffs. She hummed under her breath, not a song, just sound to fill the silence, but the melody cracked with exhaustion. The fire sputtered. The wind howled through gaps in the walls. On the rickety table sat a stack of unopened envelopes. Overdue rent, a notice from the town about the property, a bill for firewood Clara couldn't afford. Beside them lay a needle and thread, and the coat she'd been mending by candlelight for 3 nights straight. Clara glanced over. "Sweetheart, who are you writing to?" Ellie looked up, eyes bright with certainty. "Not Santa. He has too many kids to listen to. I'm writing to whoever is really listening, maybe someone who lives in the forest." Clara's smile was soft, aching. "Let me know if they write back." That night, Ellie folded the letter carefully, her small fingers pressing each crease flat. She slipped it into an envelope and scrawled across the front in her wobbling handwriting, "To whoever listens when a kid needs help." Important. The next morning, before her mother woke, Ellie bundled herself in a coat 2 sizes too small, tiptoed out into the biting cold, and knelt beneath the crooked pine tree that stood like a sentinel at the edge of the clearing. She pressed the letter into the snow, whispering, "Please, whoever you are, if you can hear me, please help us." The wind lifted the letter, swirling frost around it like a spell. For a moment, the forest seemed to lean closer, shadows deepening, branches groaning as though something ancient had shifted its attention. Then silence. Miles away, or perhaps in a place that existed beyond miles, within the hidden citadel of Midnight Crest, something stirred. The castle rose from the mountain's heart like a crown of stone and shadow, its towers wrapped in snow and mist, its halls lit by torches that never burned out. It was a place of cold grandeur, of silence broken only by the wind and the footsteps of beings who had forgotten warmth centuries ago. In the deepest chamber, Lucian Draven, Vampire King, lay motionless upon a throne of black marble veined with silver. His pale skin seemed carved from moonlight, his silver hair spilling over his shoulders like a waterfall frozen mid-fall. His eyes were closed. He had not truly moved in months, perhaps years. Grief had turned him into something more statue than man. But now, his fingers twitched. A pull, sharp, undeniable, cut through the fog of his sorrow. He felt it like a hand reaching into his chest and grasping the heart that had stopped beating 200 years ago. A voice, small and clear, echoed in his mind. "I just want Mommy to be happy again." Lucian's eyes snapped open, glowing crimson in the darkness. He sat forward slowly, breath ragged, as though waking from a death he had welcomed. Around him, the shadows rippled. The torches flared brighter. The ancient magic woven into the stones of Midnight Crest responded to the shift in their master, the first true emotion he had felt since the night his queen, Alara, died in his arms, taking their unborn child with her. He rose, moving to the tall, arched window overlooking the endless forest. Snow fell in sheets, and somewhere far below, buried in that white expanse, a child's plea burned like a beacon in his mind. "A child," he whispered, voice rough from disuse. He closed his eyes and reached out with the old magic, the kind that bound him to the forest, to the oaths sworn in blood and shadow. And there, in the scrying pool's surface, he saw her, a small girl with golden curls kneeling in the snow, a weary mother behind a cracked door, a cabin that looked like it might collapse under the weight of the next storm. Ellie's face. Lucian's breath caught. The resemblance was impossible, yet undeniable. She looked like the daughter he had imagined, the one he and Alara had prepared a nursery for, the one whose name they had whispered to each other in the dark before fate tore her away. His hands trembled. For 2 centuries, he had ruled with ice in his veins and stone where his heart should be. His court feared him, his enemies respected him, but no one had needed him, not like this. He turned from the window, moving through the vast halls with purpose for the first time in decades. He passed portraits of Alara, her dark eyes, her gentle smile, and the door to the nursery he had never opened. He stopped before his wardrobe and dressed with deliberate care. A long black coat embroidered with silver sigils of protection, a deep crimson shirt beneath, his hair loose and unbound. On a side table sat a red gift box tied with a gold ribbon. He had prepared it centuries ago, for a child who never came. Now, he lifted it carefully, as though it held something sacred. Inside, he placed a charm of eternal warmth, a vial of light that would never fade, and a folded parchment, blank for now, but waiting for a promise he didn't yet know how to write. He stepped out into the snow, and the night bent around him. The wind carried him forward, the trees bowing as he passed, the forest itself guiding him toward the plea that had shattered his centuries-long sleep, toward the child who called, toward the woman who had no idea what was coming. But before the knock that would change everything, before the vampire king crossed the threshold of a crumbling cabin at the edge of the world, there was a mother and daughter, simply trying to survive one more winter. And their story, the one that led to that desperate letter beneath the pine, began long before magic ever touched their lives. Lucian moved through the halls of Midnight Crest like a ghost remembering how to haunt. His footsteps echoed against stone floors that had known silence. For so long they seemed to recoil from the sound. Torches flared as he passed, casting a shadow long and restless against tapestries depicting battles fought before nations had names. He was old, 6 centuries, perhaps 7. He had stopped counting the years after the first 300 blurred together. He had been crowned in blood and violence, had united the fractured vampire clans under a single banner, had built this citadel with power that could reshape mountains. Kings and warlords had knelt before him. Enemies had learned to whisper his name only in daylight, as though darkness itself might carry the sound back to him. But power was a poor companion in the small hours before dawn. He stopped before a portrait that dominated the eastern corridor. Alara, his queen. Her dark eyes seemed to follow him, painted with such care that even now, 2 centuries after her death, he could almost hear her laugh. She wore a gown of deep emerald, her hand resting on her barely rounded belly, the child they had lost when fever took them both in a single, cruel week. Lucian's jaw tightened. He had burned the sickness from the land, executed the merchant who brought the plague, razed 3 villages in grief-fueled rage. It changed nothing. She was gone. The daughter they would have named Serafina was gone. And he had been left with a throne that felt like a tomb. Further down the hall, he paused before a door he had not opened in 200 years. The nursery. Through the crack beneath, he could still see the faint glow of the enchanted mobile he had crafted, silver moons and stars that turned slowly, endlessly, waiting for a child who would never sleep beneath them. His hand hovered over the handle, then fell. Not yet. He turned away, descending the spiral staircase to the heart of the citadel, where the scrying chamber waited. His court had learned long ago not to disturb him during his retreats into grief, and the halls remained empty. They feared him, not for his cruelty, but for the cold void that had replaced the man he once was. Even his generals and advisors kept their distance, conducting business through written correspondence, asking no questions about the king who ruled but no longer lived. The scrying chamber was a circular room carved from obsidian, its center dominated by a pool of water, so still it looked like black glass. Ancient runes glowed faintly along the basin's edge, pulsing with the heartbeat of the forest itself. This was old magic, older than Lucian, tied to the land through oaths sworn in a language mortals had forgotten. He knelt beside the pool and placed his hand on the surface. The water rippled outward, and images formed in its depths. There the cabin. Weathered wood, sagging roof, a single window glowing with weak firelight. Snow piled against the walls like the forest was trying to bury it. Inside, he saw the girl from his vision more clearly now. Ellie, curled beneath a threadbare blanket, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. Her mother sat at the table, head in her hands, shoulders shaking silently. Clara. Lucian studied her face, the exhaustion etched into young features, the way she wiped her eyes quickly as though ashamed of her tears even when no one was watching. She rose, checked the dying fire, added the last piece of wood, and pulled her sweater tighter against the cold that crept through every crack. Then Ellie stirred, and Clara's expression transformed. She moved to her daughter's side, brushed curls from her forehead, whispered something Lucian couldn't hear. But he saw the love in the gesture, fierce and unshakable despite the poverty pressing in from all sides. His chest constricted, a phantom sensation in a heart that no longer beat. Ellie looked like Serafina would have. The same wild curls, the same tilt of her head when she concentrated, the same fearless light in her eyes. Not identical, but close enough that looking at her felt like staring into the life he had been denied. "My lord." Lucian's head snapped up. Vasile stood in the doorway, his oldest advisor, a vampire nearly as ancient as Lucian himself, his face gaunt and severe, his loyalty unquestionable. "You felt it too," Vasile said quietly. It wasn't a question, a child's plea. Lucian rose, the water stilling behind him. "It reached me." Vasile stepped closer, his expression darkening. "And you intend to answer it." Silence stretched between them. "Mortals are fleeting, my lord," Vasile continued, his voice careful but firm. "They burn bright and vanish like mayflies. You have seen this truth 1,000 times. Attachment to them brings nothing but pain. I am aware. And yet you would go to them." Vasile's eyes narrowed. "Word will spread. Our enemies watch for weakness. The hunter clans still remember your name. Rival courts would see this as an opportunity. The great Lucian Draven, brought low by sentiment for a mortal child." Lucian turned to face him fully, and Vasile instinctively stepped back. The king's eyes glowed crimson, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. "Do you presume to command me, Vasile?" "Never, my lord. I merely counsel caution." "Your counsel is noted." But even as he spoke, Ellie's words echoed through his mind, clear as bells. "I just want mommy to be happy again." Alara had said something similar once. In the early days of their courtship, he had been consumed by war, by the burden of uniting the clans, by the weight of countless lives dependent on his decisions. She had taken his face in her hands and whispered, "I don't need you to conquer the world, Lucian. I just need you to be happy." He hadn't understood then. Happiness seemed trivial compared to duty, to survival. But after she died, he would have traded every victory, every conquest, every inch of his kingdom just to hear her say those words one more time. "I will go," Lucian said finally, if only to see the child who called. Vasile bowed, recognizing defeat. "Then go with care, my lord. The forest remembers you, but the world beyond has changed." Lucian returned to his chambers and stood before the wardrobe, considering. He would not arrive as a supplicant or a beggar. He was Lucian Draven, Vampire King, and he would present himself accordingly. He chose a long black coat embroidered with silver sigils of protection and ancient house symbols, cut to emphasize the breadth of his shoulders and the authority he carried. Beneath it, a deep crimson shirt, the color of old blood and older oaths. He left his silver hair loose, cascading past his shoulders. There was power in appearing exactly what he was. On the side table sat the red gift box, waiting. He opened it, hesitated, then carefully placed 3 items inside. A small silver charm shaped like a flame that would burn with eternal warmth, never consuming fuel, never dying. A vial of crystallized moonlight that would glow softly through any darkness, a comfort for a frightened child. And a folded piece of parchment bearing his personal seal, still blank, but ready to hold whatever promise he decided to make. He tied the gold ribbon carefully, precisely, as though the act itself was a ritual. Then Lucian Draven, who had not left his citadel in 20 years, stepped out into the snow. The night bent around him. The wind stilled. The forest recognized its king and bowed, trees creaking in deference, shadows pooling at his feet like loyal hounds. He moved through the darkness, not as a traveler, but as something fundamental, inevitable as winter, ancient as stone. And with each step, the pull grew stronger, dragging him toward a crumbling cabin at the edge of the world, toward a child's desperate wish, toward a woman who had no idea that her daughter's letter had awakened a king who had forgotten how to feel anything but grief. The night carried him forward, and Briarwood waited, unknowing. The fire had burned down to embers again, glowing like dying stars against the ash. Clara sat at the table, staring at the last 3 pieces of firewood stacked against the wall. 3 pieces. Maybe enough for tonight if she rationed carefully, let the flames dwindle to coals before adding another log. Tomorrow she would have to venture into the forest herself, drag back whatever fallen branches she could find before the snow buried everything. Her hands ached. Her back ached. Everything ached. Ellie sat on the floor nearby, wrapped in 2 threadbare blankets, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Mr. Flopsy, she called him, though one of his ears hung by a thread and his button eyes had long since fallen off. She hummed softly to herself, the same tune Clara had hummed earlier, making up words about brave rabbits who lived in warm burrows underground. Clara forced a smile. Time for bed soon, sweetheart. Can we read a story first? Of course. Though they only had 2 books left, both with pages coming loose from their spines, Clara would read them again, as she always did, making her voice cheerful even as her heart splintered. Then silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a winter evening, but something deeper, heavier. The wind that had been howling against the walls suddenly stilled. The trees outside stopped their groaning. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Clara looked up, tension prickling along her spine. A knock, heavy, deliberate, echoed through the cabin like a heartbeat. 3 strikes against the weathered wood. Measured, patient, certain. Clara's blood went cold. No one came to the cabin. Not at this hour. Not in this weather. She glanced toward the window, but snow fell so thick she couldn't see more than shadows beyond the glass. Mommy? Ellie's voice was small. Is someone here? Stay behind me. Clara rose, scooping Ellie onto her hip despite her exhaustion, positioning herself between her daughter and the door. Her free hand found the kitchen knife on the counter, dull and meant for cutting vegetables, but it was something. The knock came again, polite, insistent. Clara crossed to the door, heart hammering. She cracked it open just enough to see, and froze. A man stood on the threshold, impossibly tall, framed by swirling snow that seemed to orbit him like a storm paying homage. His skin was pale as winter moonlight, flawless and cold. Silver hair cascaded past his shoulders in waves that caught the firelight from within the cabin, shimmering like frost. His eyes, God, his eyes. They glowed faintly crimson, like embers buried deep in ash, ancient and aware and utterly inhuman. He wore a long black coat embroidered with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift when she tried to focus on them. The fabric was too fine, too perfect, untouched by the storm that raged around him. Beneath it, a deep red shirt the color of wine, or blood. In his hands, he held a large red gift box tied with a gold ribbon, cradled with careful reverence. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Every instinct screamed wrong. Not danger exactly, but something too powerful, too vast to be standing on her doorstep like a neighbor borrowing sugar. He was beautiful in the way a winter storm was beautiful, magnificent and deadly and utterly indifferent to human fragility. Then Ellie gasped, not in fear, but in wonder. Mommy, look. She pointed directly at him, her small finger unwavering. It's the man who heard my letter. The stranger's gaze shifted from Clara to Ellie, and something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Good evening. His voice was low, cultured, with an accent Clara couldn't place. Old-fashioned formality wrapped around each word. My name is Lucian Draven. Your daughter's plea reached me. Clara tightened her grip on Ellie. What are you talking about? The letter. He tilted his head slightly, snow dusting his hair like a crown. The one placed beneath the pine tree. It found its way to me. Ellie squirmed with excitement. See, Mommy? I told you someone was listening. She leaned forward, fearless. Did you come to give us a home? Lucian's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his composed exterior. He looked at Ellie as though she had driven a blade between his ribs, and for a moment Clara saw raw grief flash across his face before he mastered it. I came, he said carefully, to see the child who called for help. Clara should have slammed the door, should have grabbed Ellie and run, though where she didn't know. But her daughter's small hand was already reaching toward the stranger, and the trust in Ellie's eyes made Clara hesitate. You're shivering, Ellie said to Lucian, though Clara could see no such thing. Come inside where it's warm. Ellie. But Lucian remained perfectly still, not crossing the threshold. His gaze met Clara's, and she understood somehow. He was waiting for permission. Bound by some rule she didn't understand, but could feel in the weight of his stillness. The wind picked up again, howling. Snow swirled into the cabin. Please, Mommy, Ellie whispered. He came all this way. Clara's hands trembled. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was madness, that men with glowing eyes and perfect faces didn't appear in the night bearing gifts. But exhaustion, desperation, and her daughter's unwavering faith won out. Come in, she said, voice barely audible, before the storm gets worse. Lucian inclined his head, a gesture too graceful, too formal, and stepped across the threshold. The moment he entered, the cabin felt smaller. Not physically, but as though his presence filled every corner, pressed against the walls, made the space acknowledge something ancient and powerful standing within it. Clara instinctively backed up, still holding Ellie, still keeping herself between them. Lucian's gaze swept the room, the dying fire, the 3 pieces of firewood, the unpaid bills scattered on the table, the thin blankets, the patched clothes, the empty cupboard. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You live here, he said quietly. Not a question. An observation weighted with something that might have been anger, though not directed at them. It's all we have. Clara lifted her chin, defiant despite her fear. What do you want? To help. He extended the red gift box. If you'll allow it. Ellie wriggled down from Clara's arms and approached him without hesitation. Lucian knelt slowly, lowering himself to her eye level, making himself smaller, less threatening. He held out the box, and Ellie took it with both hands, eyes wide. Can I open it? It's yours, Lucian said softly. Ellie tore at the ribbon, lifted the lid, and gasped. Inside lay 3 items. A small silver charm shaped like a flame, a vial of glowing light that pulsed gently like a captured star, and a folded piece of parchment sealed with red wax. Ellie held up the flame charm, and it suddenly blazed to life, not with ordinary fire, but with heat that radiated outward in waves. The dying embers in the fireplace roared back to life, flames leaping high, filling the cabin with warmth that sank into Clara's bones for the first time in months. It won't go odd, Lucian explained, watching Ellie's delighted expression. Not as long as you need it. Clara stared. What are you? Lucian rose slowly, towering over them again, and for a moment his eyes glowed brighter. Someone who heard your daughter's letter, he said, and could not turn away. He moved toward the door, and Clara realized he was leaving as suddenly as he'd arrived. Snow swirled in as he stepped back onto the threshold, the storm reclaiming him. Wait, Clara didn't know what she wanted to ask. Who are you? Why are you doing this? What do you want in return? But Lucian simply bowed, a gesture from another century, and said, I will return, if you permit it. Then he was gone, black cloak swallowing him, his form dissolving into the blizzard as though he had been made of snow and shadow all along. Clara stood in the doorway, watching the space where he had been, seeing only darkness and falling snow and the distant trees that seemed to bow in his wake. Behind her, Ellie climbed into bed, clutching Mr. Flopsy and the glowing vial, her voice drowsy and content. The Night King came, Mommy. He's real. Clara closed the door with shaking hands, locked it, and leaned against the wood. The fire blazed, the cabin was warm, and she had no idea what she had just invited into their lives. He came back the next night, and the night after that. Each time, Lucian arrived as darkness fell, materializing from the forest like a figure stepping out of a dream. He never knocked anymore, just waited at the tree line until Ellie spotted him through the window and ran to fling open the door, dragging him inside with her small hands wrapped around his much larger one. Clara watched from the table, tension coiled in her shoulders, as her daughter welcomed a stranger, a thing, into their home with the trust of someone who had never learned to fear the dark. On the third night, Lucian brought firewood. Not a few pieces, but an entire stack that he carried effortlessly under one arm, arranged neatly by the door. Clara reached for a log later and froze. It was dense, ancient oak, the kind that burned slow and hot. She fed one piece to the fire and watched it blaze for hours without diminishing, the wood somehow regenerating as it burned. Impossible. On the fourth night, he left a pair of boots on the doorstep. Sturdy leather, lined with fur, perfectly broken in. Clara picked them up with shaking hands and found they fit exactly, not approximately, but exactly, as though they had been made specifically for her feet. "How did you know my size?" she asked when he returned the following evening. Lucian paused in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders. "I pay attention," he said simply. On the sixth night, Clara woke to sounds on the roof. She grabbed the kitchen knife and crept outside to find Lucian balanced on the steep pitch, his movements fluid and silent, reinforcing the sagging beams with wood that looked freshly cut, but felt smooth as glass under her fingers when she climbed up to investigate the next morning. He had also replaced 3 shingles and sealed the gaps where wind had torn through. He asked for nothing in return. No payment. No promises, no explanations, and that terrified her more than anything. "Why are you doing this?" Clara demanded one evening, standing between him and Ellie, arms crossed. "What do you want?" Lucian stood in the doorway. He never came fully inside unless Ellie pulled him, and met her gaze steadily. The firelight reflected in his crimson eyes, made them glow like coals. "Your daughter asked for help," he said. "I'm providing it. No one does this for free." "I do." "Why?" Clara's voice cracked despite her best effort. "We're nothing to you. You are not nothing." The words came out sharp, almost angry, and Lucian seemed to catch himself. He exhaled slowly. "Forgive me. I only mean that your daughter's plea was compelling, and I have resources to spare." Clara wanted to argue, to refuse, to protect what little pride she had left. But Ellie was warm for the first time in months. The roof didn't leak. They had food, bread that never went stale, milk that stayed fresh, dried meat that appeared in their cupboard when she wasn't looking. She was drowning, and he had thrown her a rope. She just didn't know what was tied to the other end. Ellie had no such reservations. "Tell me a story," she demanded one evening, climbing into Lucian's lap with the confidence of a child who had never been refused. Clara tensed, ready to intervene, but Lucian simply adjusted his position to accommodate her, one hand steadying her back with surprising gentleness. He reached for the battered storybook on the table, a collection of fairy tales with half its pages missing, and began to read. His voice was low and musical, each word shaped with precise care, as though language itself was something precious. He read about brave knights and cunning foxes, enchanted forests and kingdoms hidden in mist. Ellie listened with rapt attention, her small fingers absently playing with a lock of his silver hair. "Can I braid it?" she asked suddenly. Lucian blinked, clearly caught off guard. "I suppose." Clara watched from the kitchen, hands stilled over the sewing she was pretending to work on, as her daughter carefully separated 3 strands of Lucian's hair and wove them together with clumsy determination. He sat perfectly still, patient as stone, letting Ellie tug and twist without complaint. "There," Ellie announced proudly, holding up a crooked braid secured with a piece of red thread. "Now you look fancy." Lucian's expression softened in a way that made Clara's chest ache. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I shall wear it with honor." Later, after Ellie had gone to bed, he produced a smooth pebble from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. It glowed faintly, pulsing with soft white light. "For Ellie," he explained, "if she's afraid of the dark." "What is it?" "A simple enchantment. Watch." He cupped his hands around the stone and whispered something in a language Clara didn't recognize. The glow intensified, warm and steady. She can do it herself with practice. "Just hold it and think of light." "You're teaching my daughter magic." "I'm teaching her that she's not powerless." Lucian met her eyes. "Even small lights can chase away shadows." Clara wanted to be angry, wanted to accuse him of overstepping, of corrupting her child with impossible things. But Ellie had been afraid of the dark lately, crying out in the night, and Clara had nothing to offer but her own exhausted presence. "Thank you," she said instead, the words bitter and grateful all at once. But Clara wasn't blind. She saw the way Lucian moved, too fast, too fluid, crossing the clearing in heartbeats when it should have taken minutes. She saw him kneel in the snow with bare hands, working on the shutters for hours without gloves, without shivering, without any sign that the cold affected him at all. She saw him pause mid-sentence sometimes, head tilted as though listening to something beyond human hearing. Saw the way his eyes tracked movement in the darkness that she couldn't perceive. "What are you?" she asked one night, unable to contain the question any longer. Lucian stood at the window, staring out at the forest. Snow fell in thick curtains beyond the glass. He didn't turn around. "Does it matter?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you're in my home, near my daughter. And I don't know if I should trust you or run from you." Lucian was silent for a long moment. Then, "I mean you no harm. That is all I can promise." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give." He finally turned, and the sadness in his expression was so raw it stole Clara's breath. "If knowing what I am would make you send me away, then perhaps it's better you don't ask. And if I insist, then I will tell you," he said quietly. "And you will fear me. And Ellie will lose the only person besides you who has ever answered her prayers." The words hung between them like a blade. Clara looked away first. "Just don't hurt her." "Never." The vow came swift and absolute. "I would sooner walk into the sun." That night, Clara woke to see Lucian standing outside the cabin, silhouetted against the snow. He wasn't looking at the door or the windows. His gaze was fixed on the dark tree line, his posture rigid, alert, waiting. Clara pressed her face to the cold glass, following his line of sight. The forest was still, but something about the quality of that stillness felt wrong, watchful, as though the shadows between the trees were breathing. Lucian's hand moved to his side, where Clara suddenly realized he wore a sword, long and slender, hidden beneath his cloak until now. His fingers rested on the pommel. Then, just as suddenly, he relaxed, turned, met Clara's eyes through the window. He shook his head slightly. "Not tonight." But Clara saw the truth in his expression. Something was out there. Something he had been expecting. Something he was keeping away from them. She pulled back from the window, heart pounding, and checked on Ellie, still asleep, clutching Mr. Flopsy and the glowing pebble, safe and warm. Outside, Lucian remained at his post, a sentinel against the dark. And Clara realized with creeping dread that whatever danger lurked in the forest, she and Ellie were caught in the middle of it. The whispers started in town 3 days later. Clara heard them at the general store when she went to trade sewing work for flour. 2 women huddled near the canned goods, voices low, but not low enough. "Saw him myself, standing at the forest edge, tall as a tree, hair like moonlight. And his eyes. Mary said they glowed red in the dark. Nothing natural about that. Nothing human." Clara's hands tightened on her basket. She kept her head down, paid quickly, and left before anyone could ask if she'd seen the stranger. But she felt their stares following her out, heard the conversations pause as she passed. By the time she returned to the cabin, her stomach was churning with unease. That night, Lucian didn't come. Ellie waited by the window until her eyes drooped, clutching the glowing pebble. "Where is he, Mommy?" "I don't know, sweetheart." Clara stroked her daughter's curls, relief and worry warring in her chest. Perhaps he had sensed the town's suspicion and decided to stay away. Perhaps that was for the best. But she couldn't shake the memory of him standing guard in the snow, watching the darkness, hand on his sword, waiting for something. The attack came at midnight. Clara woke to the sound of splintering wood. Not the door, something at the window. Clawing, scraping, the shutters Lucian had reinforced rattling violently in their frames. She shot upright, heart hammering. "Ellie!" Her daughter was already awake, eyes wide with terror, clutching Mr. Flopsy against her chest. The glowing pebble on the nightstand pulsed frantically, as though responding to her fear. Another crash. The window shattered inward, glass exploding across the floor. Through the broken frame came something that had once been human. Pale skin stretched tight over protruding bones, eyes sunken and wild, mouth open to reveal teeth filed to points. It moved with jerking, unnatural speed, hissing as it hauled itself through the window. Clara didn't think. She grabbed the kitchen knife from under her pillow. She'd started sleeping with it after seeing Lucian's vigilance, and threw herself between the creature and Ellie. "Stay back." Her voice shook but didn't break. The thing laughed, a wet, rattling sound. When it spoke, its voice was layered with echoes, as though multiple throats were speaking at once. "The child smells of magic, of old blood. The king's claim, get out of my house." Clara swung the knife. The blade caught its shoulder, and the creature shrieked, not in pain, but in rage. It backhanded her casually, and she flew across the room, crashing into the table. Stars exploded across her vision. "Mommy!" Ellie's scream cut through the ringing in Clara's ears. Clara tried to stand, tasted blood, saw the creature advancing on Ellie with skeletal fingers outstretched. The door exploded inward. Not open. Exploded. Wood and hinges and metal scattered like shrapnel as Lucian Draven stepped through the wreckage. His eyes blazed crimson, so bright they cast red shadows on the walls. His lips pulled back from his teeth, and Clara saw what she had somehow never let herself acknowledge. Fangs, long and curved and wickedly sharp. His silver hair whipped around him despite the still air, as though moved by an invisible wind. Power radiated from him in waves that made Clara's skin prickle, that made the fire gutter and the shadows deepen. He looked like a king, like a monster, like something carved from nightmare and fury. "You dare," Lucian snarled, his voice dropping into a register that vibrated through Clara's bones. "Touch what is mine?" The creature hissed and lunged. Lucian moved. Clara's eyes couldn't track it. One moment he was in the doorway, the next he had the creature by the throat, lifting it off the ground as though it weighed nothing. They crashed through the broken window together, out into the snow. "Stay inside." Lucian's command cut through the chaos. But Clara scrambled up, ignoring the pain in her ribs, and pulled Ellie behind her as she moved to the window. She had to see, had to know. Outside, near the small Christmas tree Ellie had decorated with pine cones and ribbons, two monsters fought. The feral vampire was fast, inhumanly fast, but Lucian was faster. He caught its claws mid-strike, twisted, and Clara heard bones snap like dry branches. The creature shrieked and raked at his face. Blood, impossibly dark, almost black, streaked across Lucian's pale skin. He didn't flinch. Instead, he drove his fist through the creature's chest. The feral vampire's scream cut off abruptly. Lucian withdrew his hand, through the creature's back, holding something that pulsed weakly in his grip. Clara's stomach turned as she realized what it was. A heart. Lucian crushed it, and the feral vampire began to disintegrate. Its skin flaked to ash, its bones crumbled, until nothing remained but gray powder scattered across the blood-stained snow. Silence fell like a curtain. Lucian stood alone in the clearing, snow falling around him, his coat torn and bloodied, his chest heaving despite the fact Clara had never seen him breathe heavily before. His eyes still glowed crimson, fangs still visible, and when he turned toward the cabin, Clara saw him fully for the first time. Not the courteous stranger who read stories and braided hair. Not the mysterious benefactor who repaired roofs and brought firewood. A vampire. Ancient, powerful, lethal. He had killed with his bare hands and hadn't even seemed to struggle. "Clara." His voice was rough, almost pleading. He took a step toward the cabin. "Are you hurt?" "Is Ellie?" "Don't." The word came out strangled. Clara pulled Ellie tighter against her side, the knife still clutched in her shaking hand. "Don't come any closer." Lucian froze. The glow in his eyes dimmed slightly, and Clara saw something crack across his expression. Pain, rawer than any physical wound. "I would never harm you," he said quietly. "You must know that. I don't know anything about you." Clara's voice broke. "You're a monster. You've been lying to us this whole time." "I never lied." "You never told the truth." Tears stung Clara's eyes. Fury and terror tangled together. "What else haven't you told me? What else are you hiding? What do you want from us?" "Only to protect you." Lucian's hands hung at his sides, empty, non-threatening. Blood dripped from his torn coat onto the pristine snow. That creature was drawn here by the magic in Ellie's letter. By my presence. I've been keeping watch to prevent exactly this. So, it's your fault. The accusation was unfair and Clara knew it, but fear made her cruel. We were safe before you came, before you brought your world to our door. Lucian flinched as though she'd struck him. You're right, he said, voice hollow. This is my fault. I should never have answered her call. Behind Clara, Ellie whimpered. Mommy, he saved us. Hush, baby. Clara moved toward the door, or what remained of it, and gripped the splintered frame. Her hands shook so badly she could barely stand, but she forced herself to meet Lucian's gaze. Stay away from us, she whispered. Please. Just stay away. Then she pulled Ellie inside and slammed what was left of the door shut. Through the broken window, she watched him. Lucian stood motionless in the snow for a long moment, head bowed, silver hair curtaining his face. The wind picked up, swirling ash and snow around his boots. Then he turned, cloak billowing behind him, and walked toward the tree line. He didn't look back. Mommy, no. Ellie tore free from Clara's grip and ran to the window, pressing her small hands and face against the cold glass. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Don't leave. Night King, please don't leave. But Lucian disappeared into the forest, shadows swallowing him, and the clearing fell empty and silent. Ellie sobbed, her breath fogging the window. He saved us, she whispered brokenly. Why did you make him go? Clara sank to the floor, pulling Ellie into her lap, and held her daughter while they both cried. The fire Lucian had enchanted still burned warm. The roof he'd repaired still held. The boots he'd given her still sat by the door. And outside, in the blood-stained snow near the little Christmas tree, a single braid of silver hair lay tangled in red thread, the one Ellie had woven with such care. Abandoned, forgotten, left behind by a king who had finally learned that some distances couldn't be crossed, no matter how desperately you wanted to protect what you loved. Clara didn't sleep that night, or the next. She sat at the table with the kitchen knife beside her, watching the broken door she'd barricaded with the dresser, listening to every creak and whisper of the wind. Ellie had finally exhausted herself crying and lay curled in bed, clutching Mr. Flopsy and the glowing pebble that pulsed softly in the darkness. He saved us, Ellie had said. And he had. Clara couldn't deny that. The creature, the vampire, would have killed them both if Lucian hadn't arrived. She owed him their lives. But he was a monster too, wasn't he? She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell. Vampires who seduced and drained, who made bargains that seemed kind until the price came due, who stole children in the night and left changelings in their place. Monsters who wore beautiful faces and spoke honeyed words while plotting cruelty. But Lucian had never asked for anything, never demanded payment, never even touched them without invitation. I would never harm you, he had said. Clara pressed her hands against her eyes, exhaustion and terror making her thoughts spiral. What if he was telling the truth? What if she had just condemned them by sending away the only protection they had? What if she was wrong? What if she was right? The next morning, Clara walked into town despite her aching ribs and returned with salt, iron nails, and sprigs of dried herbs the shopkeeper swore would ward off evil. She worked methodically, laying salt lines across every threshold, hanging crude crosses made from iron nails above the windows, tucking bundles of rowan and vervain into the corners. Mommy, what are you doing? Ellie watched from the bed, eyes red from crying. Keeping us safe, baby. But the Night King keeps us safe. Clara's hands stilled. We have to protect ourselves now. Ellie's lower lip trembled, but she didn't argue. She just turned away, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. At midnight crest, Lucian sat alone in his throne room, motionless as carved stone. The great hall stretched empty around him, torches burning low, shadows pooling in corners like living things. He had dismissed his court, refused all counsel, and locked himself away with only his thoughts for company. Stay away from us. Clara's words echoed through his mind, sharper than any blade. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the way she held Ellie like a shield between them, the revulsion when she finally understood what he was. He had been a fool to think it could be different, to hope that answering a child's prayer might somehow redeem him. Vasile had been right. Mortals were fleeting. Attachments brought disaster. But even as he thought it, he felt the pull, that same inexorable tug that had drawn him to Ellie's letter. She was in danger. Clara was terrified. And he was sitting here doing nothing. Lucian rose abruptly and descended to the citadel's deepest archives, where the oldest texts were kept. Tomes bound in leather and locked with magic, scrolls written in languages dead for millennia. He searched until he found what he needed, records of ancient oaths, of bonds forged between immortals and those they swore to protect. The blood oath of protection. It was forbidden for good reason. The cost was steep, a portion of his power, years shaved from even his immortal existence, vulnerability to those he protected. And once sworn, it could never be broken. He would be bound to Ellie's safety until one of them ceased to exist. But it would also shield her from supernatural threats, mark her as under his protection, and ensure that no creature of darkness could harm her without facing his wrath. Lucian laid out the ritual components with steady hands, a silver blade, a bowl of black glass, candles arranged in ancient patterns. He spoke the words in old tongue, felt the magic rise around him like water, cold and heavy. Then he drew the blade across his palm. His blood, black as ink, dripped into the bowl. The candles flared. The magic coalesced into burning sigils that wrapped around his forearm, searing into his skin with pain that would have felled a lesser creature. He gritted his teeth and spoke the vows. By blood and shadow, I bind myself to the child Ellie Winslow. I shall not feed from her or those she loves. I shall not claim her against her will. I shall shield her from all who would do her harm, at cost of my own existence. This oath I swear, unbreakable until death. The magic sealed with a pulse of power that shook the foundations of the citadel. The sigils burned brighter, then faded to silver scars that wound around his forearm like chains. It was done. Lucian sagged against the altar, breathing hard, feeling the immediate drain, like a piece of himself had been carved away and given elsewhere. But beneath the pain, there was relief. Now Ellie would be protected. Even if Clara never let him near them again, even if he had to watch from the shadows for the rest of his existence, Ellie would be safe. It was enough. It had to be. Ellie drew pictures. She sat on the floor with her crayons, the same red one she'd used for her letter, and filled page after page. Lucian standing in the snow with his gift box. Lucian reading stories. Lucian with his hair braided, smiling. Clara watched her daughter's small hands move across the paper, watched the grief etched into her young face, and felt something crack inside her chest. He's not coming back, is he? Ellie whispered. Clara knelt beside her, pulled her close. I don't know, sweetheart. I'm sorry. Ellie pressed her face against Clara's shoulder. I miss him. I know. That night, Lucian stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the tree line. He could feel Clara's wards, crude but effective, stinging against his skin when he tried to approach. Salt burned. Iron repelled. The herbs whispered warnings in voices older than memory. She had locked him out completely. Through the window, he could see Ellie's silhouette as she climbed into bed. Could see Clara moving around the cabin, checking the barricaded door for the 100th time. Could feel the fear radiating from within. His chest ached, a phantom pain in a heart that no longer beat. Ellie, he whispered into the darkness, knowing she couldn't hear. Forgive me. The sigils on his arm pulsed once, reminding him of his oath. He would keep watch, would guard them from the shadows, would ensure no harm ever reached them again. Even if they never knew. Even if Clara never forgave him. Even if he spent eternity alone, watching a light he could never touch. Snow began to fall. Lucian remained at his post, sentinel in the dark, whispering a child's name like a prayer into the winter night. The storm came 3 days later, heralding something worse. Clara heard the whispers at the market again, louder this time, less careful. A hunter had come to town asking questions about creatures in the woods. Men with rifles gathered at the tavern, talking about organizing a search party. Someone mentioned the woman and child living alone at the forest's edge, practically in the monster's jaws. Clara left quickly, head down, heart pounding. That night, she made her decision. They had to leave. Not just the cabin, Briarwood entirely. She would take Ellie south, find work in a city where no one knew them, where forests didn't press close and vampires didn't answer letters. It would be hard, maybe impossible. But staying here meant waiting for either Lucian's world or the town's fear to destroy them. She waited until Ellie was asleep, then began packing quietly. Their few belongings fit into a single worn bag: the patched coat, Mr. Flopsy, what little food remained, Ellie's drawings. She hesitated over the glowing pebble, then left it on the table. Better to leave all traces of magic behind. Mommy? Clara turned to find Ellie sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes. What are you doing? Packing, sweetheart. We're leaving. Ellie's face lit up despite her drowsiness. Are we going to our new home? The hope in her daughter's voice was a knife to Clara's heart. We're going to find it ourselves, she lied, forcing a smile. Just you and me. But what about the Night King? Clara's hands still on the bag. He's not coming with us. Why not? Ellie's voice cracked. He promised to help us. I know, baby. But sometimes things don't work out the way we hope. Clara crossed to the bed, pulled Ellie into her arms. Get dressed now. We need to hurry. They stepped out into the blizzard just before dawn. Snow fell in sheets, the wind howling like something alive and angry. Clara clutched the bag in one hand and Ellie's small fingers in the other, pushing forward into the storm. The wards she'd laid flickered as they crossed the threshold, then died completely, salt lines scattered by the wind. They made it 3 steps into the clearing before he appeared. Lucian materialized from the darkness at the forest's edge, snow swirling around him like a living thing. His silver hair whipped wildly, his crimson eyes blazing with urgency and something that looked like desperation. He wore the same dark coat, now repaired, but his expression was raw, unguarded. Clara, please. His voice cut through the storm. Don't run. Clara pulled Ellie behind her. Stay back. The roads are treacherous in this storm. And there are hunters, mortals who know what I am, who will assume you're connected to me. You'll die before dawn. Because of you. Clara's voice broke. They're hunting because you came here, because you brought your world to our door. Lucian flinched but didn't deny it. You're right. This is my fault. But running won't save you. It will only make you easier prey. Then what would you have me do? Tears froze on Clara's cheeks. Stay here and wait for the next monster to break through our window? Wait for the town to come with torches and questions? We're trapped because of you. I know. The anguish in his voice stopped her. I know what I've done. But please, don't punish Ellie for my mistakes. Before Clara could respond, Ellie tore free from her grip and ran to Lucian, throwing her arms around his legs, sobbing. Don't let Mommy take me away. I don't want to leave you. Lucian dropped to his knees, gathering Ellie carefully, his expression shattering. Little one, you promised to help us. Ellie cried against his chest. You promised. I did. And I will. Lucian looked up at Clara, desperation and determination warring in his glowing eyes. Come with me. What? To Midnight Crest. My citadel. He spoke quickly, urgently. It's protected by wards older and stronger than anything in this forest. No hunter can breach them. No creature would dare approach. You'll be safe there, both of you. Clara's laugh was bitter. Safe in a vampire's castle? Yes. His answer was simple, absolute. I swear on my existence. Stay one night. Let me show you the truth of what I am, what I can offer. If afterward you still fear me, if you still want to run, his voice caught. I will take you anywhere you wish to go, and never trouble you again. Mommy, please, Ellie whispered. I'm scared out here. Clara looked at her daughter, shivering in the storm, terrified, clinging to a monster who held her like she was something precious, and felt her resolve crack. She thought of the roads ahead, dark and dangerous. The hunters Lucian warned of. The miles they have to walk with no food, no shelter, no protection. And she thought of the vampire who had repaired their roof, who read stories with infinite patience, who had sworn an oath she didn't yet understand. One night, Clara said hoarsely, "That's all." Lucian's expression flooded with relief. He stood, cradling Ellie against his chest, and extended his free hand to Clara. One night, I promise. Clara hesitated, staring at his outstretched palm. Then, for Ellie's sake, only for Ellie, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm despite the cold, steady despite the storm. Hold tight, he murmured. The world lurched. Shadows rose around them like wings, and the forest blurred. Clara felt herself pulled forward, through darkness and snow, and something that felt like falling upward. When her vision cleared, they were deep in the woods, deeper than Clara had ever dared go, standing before a path that shouldn't exist, carved from mist and moonlight. And at its end, rising from the mountain's heart, stood Midnight Crest. Lucian led them deeper into the forest along paths that shouldn't exist. Clara held Ellie close as they walked, watching in stunned silence as the trees seemed to lean away from Lucian, branches lifting to clear their passage. The wind that had howled moments ago now whispered softly, and the snow that should have blinded them fell gently, almost reverently, around his shoulders. He moved with one hand extended, and Clara realized he was weaving something. Magic, perhaps, or simply commanding the elements that recognized him as their sovereign. A barrier of warmth surrounded them, keeping the worst of the cold at bay. "Where are we going?" Clara finally asked. "Somewhere I should have brought you, from the beginning." Lucian's voice was quiet. "Before I asked you to trust me." They walked for what felt like hours but might have been minutes. Time moved strangely in his presence. Finally, they emerged into a clearing carved from solid rock, surrounded by ancient pines weighed down with snow. Moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating a small cemetery of white marble and weathered stone. Lucian stopped before the largest tomb. His hand fell away from Ellie, and for a moment he simply stood there, shoulders tight, as though gathering courage. "This is Queen Alara," he said quietly. "My wife." The tomb was exquisite, white marble etched with roses and stars, her name inscribed in flowing script. Clara stepped closer, reading the dates. 200 years ago. Beside it stood a smaller stone, barely knee-high, with no name. Just a single word, beloved. Clara's breath caught. "Your child. Our daughter. We never got to name her." Lucian knelt before the stones, his hand resting on the smaller one. "Alara fell ill with fever when she was 6 months along. I tried everything, every healer, every magic, every desperate bargain. Nothing worked. They died together and his voice cracked. I survived." Ellie slipped from Clara's arms and moved to Lucian's side, placing her small hand on his shoulder. He closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. "For 2 centuries I existed but did not live," he continued. "I ruled because I had to. I fought because enemies demanded it. But I felt nothing. The world became gray, distant, as though I was watching it through fog." He looked up at Clara, and the raw grief in his expression made her chest ache. "Until your daughter's letter, Lucian." My heart began beating again the night she called for help. The words came soft but absolute, not metaphorically, literally. I felt it start in my chest, a rhythm I hadn't known in 200 years. Her plea shattered something I thought permanently frozen. Clara sank to her knees in the snow, overwhelmed. This wasn't a monster. This was a man, immortal, impossibly powerful, but fundamentally a man who had loved and lost and somehow found the courage to feel again. "I came because of Ellie," Lucian admitted, turning to face her fully. "Because she reminded me of the daughter I lost. Because her innocence and hope cut through centuries of darkness." He paused, and something vulnerable crossed his features. "But I stayed because of you. Me. Your stubborn courage. The way you fight for her even when you're breaking. The warmth you try to hide. The humor that flickers through despite everything." His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently touched Clara's cheek. "You reminded me what it meant to admire someone, to want to protect them not out of duty, but because the thought of them suffering was unbearable." Tears slipped down Clara's face. "I don't know how to do this. Everything about you is impossible, and I'm just everything," Lucian said fiercely. "You are everything." Clara's hand covered his where it rested against her cheek. For the first time, she didn't pull away, didn't flinch. She let herself feel the warmth of his touch, the gentleness in those dangerous hands. "I'm not afraid of you hurting us," she whispered. "Not anymore." "Then what?" "Losing you. Building a life around you, and then..." Her voice broke. "What if you realize we're not worth the trouble? What if your world demands you leave? What if?" Lucian pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Clara let herself collapse against his chest. She felt his chin rest on top of her head, felt the steady rise and fall of breathing he didn't need, but performed anyway, for her comfort. "I performed a blood oath 3 days ago," he murmured. "An unbreakable vow that binds me to Ellie's protection until one of us ceases to exist. I cannot leave, even if I wanted to. And Clara, he pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I don't want to. Ellie wedged herself between them, wrapping her arms around both. Does this mean we're a family now? Lucian's laugh was shaky, disbelieving. He looked at Clara, question and hope warring in his expression. Clara thought of the cabin she was running from, the life of fear and poverty she'd been trying to escape. And she thought of this man who had crossed impossible distances because a child asked for help, who wore his grief like armor, but had somehow found room in his heart for them. Maybe, she whispered, maybe we are. They walked back together, hand in hand, Ellie between them, chattering about the glowing trees and magic snow, oblivious to the monumental shift that had occurred. Lucian was quieter than usual, but Clara caught him glancing at her, something like wonder softening his features. There's something I need to show you, he said as they approached familiar territory. Something I've been preparing. What? You'll see. They crested the hill above their clearing, and Clara stopped dead. Where their crumbling cabin had stood, a new structure now rose. Solid stone and timber, smoke curling from a real chimney, warm light glowing from multi-paned windows. It was small but perfect, built to weather any storm, with a porch and shutters and everything their old cabin had lacked. Lucian, Clara breathed. What did you do? He smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since she'd known him. I built you a home. Clara stood frozen, staring at the cottage that had appeared like something from a dream. It was modest, not a palace, not grand, but solid and real, built from stone and timber that looked like it had stood for generations. Smoke curled from a sturdy chimney. Real windows reflected the moonlight. A porch wrapped around the front, and beside the door hung a lantern that glowed with soft, steady light. How? Clara whispered. Old magic. Resources I've accumulated over centuries. Lucian's voice was uncertain, as though he feared she might reject it. It's yours, Clara. No strings. No conditions. Ellie squealed and ran toward the cottage, flinging open the door. Clara followed on shaking legs, Lucian behind her. Inside, warmth enveloped them immediately. A real iron stove radiated heat, already stocked with wood that burned steady and clean. Thick rugs covered the wooden floors. 2 proper beds stood against the far wall, piled with quilts and pillows. The pantry door hung open, revealing shelves stocked with flour, salt, dried meat, vegetables, everything they could need for months. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Lucian, I can't. It's yours, he repeated firmly. Not mine. Yours. On the table lay 2 pieces of parchment. Clara moved to them with trembling hands and read the first, a deed, legal and official, granting ownership of the cottage and the surrounding land to Clara Winslow. No mortgage, no debt, just her name in an elegant script. The second document was stranger, written in both English and a flowing script she didn't recognize. But the English portion was clear enough. Blood oath of protection, sworn by Lucian Draven to Ellie Winslow. The bearer of this oath vows to shield the child from all supernatural harm, to never feed from her or those she loves, to never claim her against her will, and to defend her at the cost of his own existence. This oath is unbreakable and eternal. Below it, a silver sigil gleamed, the same pattern Clara had glimpsed on Lucian's forearm. You did this, Clara breathed. You bound yourself to protect her. Yes. Why? Because she needed protection. And because Lucian stopped, struggling with words. Because I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to her. Clara set the parchment down with shaking hands. No demands. No claims of ownership. No requirement that she love him in return. Just pure, selfless protection. Mommy, look. Ellie ran over, clutching a piece of paper. I drew this before we left. Clara took the drawing, and her breath caught. It showed Lucian standing in the snow, holding his red gift box. Beside him, Clara smiled, actually smiled, and Ellie stood between them, one hand in Lucian's, one in Clara's. Above the drawing, in Ellie's wobbly handwriting, the Night King gave us a home. Something inside Clara shattered and rebuilt itself all at once. Ellie, she whispered, when did you draw this? The night he first came. I knew he would help us. Ellie beamed up at Lucian. I told you someone was listening. Clara looked at the cottage around her, solid, warm, real. Looked at the deed bearing her name. looked at the oath sworn in blood and magic. And finally, she looked at Lucian, standing by the door as though uncertain whether he was allowed to stay. "What do you want from us?" she asked. Not an accusation this time. A genuine question. Truly? Lucian met her gaze, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. "To protect your daughter," he said quietly. "To see you smile. To be allowed to stand in the doorway and know you are both safe." He paused, voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Anything more is a gift I do not deserve, but would cherish for whatever time you'd grant it." Clara crossed the room in 3 strides. She reached up, took his face in her hands, those dangerous, gentle hands, and pulled him down to kiss her. It was soft at first, tentative, as though both of them feared the other might pull away. Then Lucian's arms came around her, careful and reverent, and Clara melted into him, letting herself feel safe for the first time in years. When they broke apart, Clara kept her hands on his face, meeting those crimson eyes without fear. "You didn't steal our home," she whispered. "You answered a little girl's letter." Lucian's eyes closed, and she felt dampness against her palms. Tears, impossible as it seemed. "Can I stay?" he asked, voice broken.
"Yes."
"For as long as you want. Forever, then." "Okay." Clara laughed through her own tears. "Forever." Group hug. Ellie launched herself at them, wrapping her arms around both their legs. Lucian dropped to his knees and pulled them both close, and they stayed like that, 3 people who had been alone, now becoming something whole. 3 months later. Winter deepened, but the cottage stayed warm. Clara learned to bake bread in the new stove. Ellie grew taller, her cheeks filling out, her laughter ringing through rooms that finally felt like home. And every evening, as dusk fell, there came a knock at the door. Not heavy or ominous. Just 3 soft taps, familiar and welcome. "He's here." Ellie would shriek, abandoning whatever she was doing to run to the door. Clara would follow, smiling, and together they would fling it open to find Lucian standing on the porch, snow dusting his silver hair, a soft smile on his face that was becoming more frequent, more real. "Good evening," he would say, formal as always. "Come in, you ridiculous man," Clara would laugh, pulling him inside. He visited every night, sometimes staying until dawn, reading stories to Ellie, or helping Clara with repairs, or simply sitting by the fire, growing warmer and more human in their presence. The court at midnight Crest saw their king less, but they saw him happier, and that was enough. One evening, Ellie sat at the table with her crayons, writing another letter. "Who are you writing to this time?" Clara asked, amused. "No one. I'm just saying thank you." Ellie held up the paper, and Clara read, "Dear whoever listened, I asked for a home. The Night King brought us one and stayed. Thank you. Love, Ellie." Clara pressed a kiss to her daughter's curls, then crossed to where Lucian stood by the window, watching snow fall over their little kingdom. She took his hand. He laced his fingers through hers. And in the warm cottage built by magic and love, 3 hearts, one mortal, one small and brave, one ancient and finally awakened, beat in rhythm. Home. The end.